So here's a question from Prop. Now you're going to have to help me with the surname. Vadanathorn. Prop Vadanathorn. That is a very thought out name. I hope it's not your real name. I don't think it is. I think it's a made up name. So a video about your ancestors and their history. Well, what to say about my ancestors really? One thing, I'm not going to necessarily talk about specific individuals, but my father did do quite a lot of family history research, which I find very interesting. I don't know an awful lot about my mother's ancestry, but on my father's side, I'm mostly English. I'm 1/16 German and 1/8 Scottish. So there we go. I'm mostly British with a tiny bit of German. And that bit of German was Prussian specifically, because it's from the 19th century. And the bit of German, I know I've got some German subscribers, the bit of German that I've got is from Hessen, I believe the city's called, where the Hussites came from. So there we go, I have a bit of German in me. And, but not right now, sorry. And the bit of Scottish in me is from Ayrshire. Newton upon Ayr to be exact, although my ancestors moved to Glasgow from Ayrshire, and in fact my great-great-grandfather was the chief of Glasgow Police from 1866 to 1880 something. Yeah, so I've got a bit of Scottish and a bit of German. The rest of me is English, mostly from the southeast, at least on my father's side, mostly from Surrey, Sussex and Kent and London, and on my mother's side it's a mixture, but of English. And so there we go, that's all what I'll say for now about my ancestors and their history. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of family connection to Brighton as well, which is, for those of you who know, it's on this quite a nice place on the south coast, and there's some places in Brighton which are named actually after some of my ancestors. So N. Ari, a regular commenter on my channel, says, can you talk about Fiore de Liberi and his treatise? Well, you know what, it's kind of silly that I haven't spoken more about Fiore, and all I'm going to say at this point is yes, I definitely intend to talk more about Fiore in the future, because obviously I did, as far as I'm aware, Eleonora Durbin and myself, Eleonora being a good friend of mine, she's actually Italian, she married an Englishman, hence the surname. We did, as far as I'm aware, the first English translation. There have since been other English translations of Fiore by Mark Lancaster and Tom Leone and various other people. But that's available on Wiktor now, the translation. So if you want to go and start reading Fiore, then go on Wiktor now and look up Fiore and you'll see my name above the translation. But Fiore was a master-at-arms who seems to have, he claims to have been born into a noble house of De Liberi, but there's no records of any noble family with that name. So we suspect that he might have been sort of more, well, we're not really sure about the freeman status in that part of Italy, in Friuli, where he's from, had a particular status. They were sort of middle class, they weren't really nobles, but it seems that some of them may have served as something like knights, and that might be where Fiore's kind of background, where his family is. So yeah, he was born in probably the 1350s or 60s, we can guess from the ages that he gives in his later works. And we know that by the 1380s he was very respected as an authority on combat, and rather than judicial combat or trial by combat, rather knightly combats. That is where two knights have an issue with each other, either for national pride or because they support different families' claims to different things, or just a personal vendetta. For example, Galeazzo da Mantova was a student of Fiore, and he had crossed words with Marshal Boucicaut. In fact, there were two Boucicaut's. There's a Boucicaut the older and Boucicaut the younger. We think it's Boucicaut the elder, who was Marshal Boucicaut, who was one of the commanders of the Battle of Agincourt, and also where he was captured, and he was also captured earlier by the Turks at the Battle of Nicopolis. Marshal Boucicaut was one of the great, famous, legendary knights of the 14th and early 15th centuries in Europe. He was famous all over Europe, and he fought one of Fiore's students, Galeazzo da Mantova. Galeazzo was a mercenary captain, and who was famous in Italy, condottieri, leader of mercenaries essentially. And Galeazzo and Boucicaut had crossed words about the relative manliness of Italian and French men. So they decided that was a good enough reason to have a knightly duel, and in fact they had two. Neither of them resulted in death, although they could have done because they were using sharp weapons. And there we go. That's all I'll say about it for now. But Fiore was a student, or a teacher of knights, essentially, training them for kind of almost. It seems like he was almost he'd made his name by training these knights for knightly combats, because that's what he refers to the most in his prologue, and he lists their names. Many of them were quite famous at the time. And we know from other historical sources that those events did happen. So yeah, he obviously a very interesting guy, and he wrote a treatise. He wrote one dedicated to Niccolo d'Este of Ferrara, who was a very great lord in Italy at the time, Niccolo III d'Este in fact, and it seems that he dedicated at least one book to Niccolo. There are two surviving with dedications to Niccolo in them, but we don't know if one is perhaps a later copy or something like that. And I believe that Fiore was not based at Niccolo's court. I think it was a diplomatic gift. I think that Fiore was based at the court of Milan, so under the Duke of Milan, who he mentions several times, or at least a couple of times, in his prologue. So there we go. That's what I'll say about Fiore for now. I will no doubt talk much more about Fiore and his system and the history of surrounding it in future videos.